Let's say you want to install an amplifier and subwoofer into a vehicle, but you want to be able to disconnect the whole system, including the amplifier, all at once so that you can take everything out. Is it possible? And if so, what items do we need? Can it be done? I'm Mark. Welcome to CarAudioFabrication. Let's find out. First things first, let me just say that I feel the proper way to have an amplifier installed in a vehicle is to actually install it and mount it in the vehicle. With the amplifier permanently mounted in the vehicle, the only connection you would need to disconnect in order to take the subwoofer enclosure out is just the speaker wires themselves. But with that said, I can see some reasons why you would want to also be able to easily remove the amplifier along with the subwoofer enclosure in one big assembly. Maybe the vehicle is unfortunately going to need to be parked in an area that has a lot of crime, and maybe you don't want the amplifier to be easily stolen. Now, there is a ton of different ways that you can avoid theft. I did make a video about this in the past, but this is just an example why you might want to be able to easily remove that amplifier. Another good reason for wanting to be able to quickly remove the amplifier is maybe this is an install in a performance vehicle where you take it to the track for like a track day and you want the vehicle to be as light as possible. When you're not at the track, you want to still be able to enjoy some tunes, but when you are at the track, we know that literally every pound matters, so maybe you want to be able to pull out that amplifier, and making it easily removable is a good idea. My point here is if your application allows you to keep the amplifier in the vehicle, that is probably best, but this is something that I get questions about all the time. How can we make the amp easily removable if it's mounted on the box, especially for an entry-level subwoofer system like this one? A lot of times we see people mounting the amp on the box, so we might as well explore how we can do it right with all this different gear and make it removable. So what are we going to use here? Well, we have the JL Audio JD250/1. I recently did an overview video about this amplifier, 250 watts on our JL Audio 12W1 V3. Next up, we have a Neutrik speak-on connector. The speaker wire from the amplifier into the box can obviously stay connected, but still, we might as well have an idea what we could use for a quick disconnect solution here, if need be. I'm going to come up with a solution here to quickly connect our RCA cable from the vehicle to an RCA cable that goes to the amp, and then we also have a quick disconnect power connection that we're going to be using. And then we, of course, have our signal wires, our speaker wires, and our power wires. All of this is from New Concepts. Links to all of the different gear that I'm going to be using are available down in the video description. I start with measuring out a location for the amplifier. I want it to be centered from top to bottom, and I know I want to skew it over to this side of the box because that's where all the different connections in the vehicle are going to be. Next, I want to make sure that I use some good coarse thread screws so that this bites into the wood really well to hold the amplifier. And if you guys want to see a full video that I did about some different ideas when you are mounting an amplifier to the box, you can check that out up in the corner of the screen. One of the main points that I made in that video is that you want to make sure that your box is really solid. In this case, I custom built this box. I did the old test where you put your hand on it and you play a sine wave, and this box is so solid you really can't feel any vibration on this mounting surface at all. If you are using a pre-made box where the construction isn't all that great and there's a lot of vibration in that panel, then you should probably avoid this. Amplifier mounted to the box, the first wiring connection I want to make is for the speaker wires here to go into the enclosure. So for this connection, we're using the Neutrik speak-on connections. This is something new that I haven't really shown here on the channel before. The way that the male version of this works is we unscrew this, and this gives us access to the actual wire connections themselves. Now, there are a ton of different versions of the speak-on connector. You can see that this particular plastic molding has space for 2 additional connections right here. That's because there is a 4-conductor version, but obviously for this, with only one subwoofer, we just need the positive and negative connection here. Something that is pretty cool about these is they're actually keyed, so you can only put these in one way. In other words, if you were to rotate this around 360 degrees, there's only one position that you can actually slide this in, and once you slide it in, you push and twist, and you can see that that little connector locks in. So this is now locked in position. In order to release it, we pull that connector back and twist, and now we can take it out. We're going to make our connections here in a second, but I did want to show you the inside of this piece. It actually has this black piece here that fits inside, and what that does is as we twist this and tighten it on to the piece that has the wires, that black piece actually kind of sandwiches down and crimps onto our wire. This gives the connector an even better hold on the wire and just makes it overall a really nice solid connection. I think this is going to be hard to see on camera because the marks are really small, but each of these different spots is actually marked with a positive or negative polarity. And if this was a 4 connection option, these both have a number 1 next to them, so you know that those are number 1 positive and negative, and then these have a number 2 right there that you can see next to them. To make the connection for the wires, you loosen each of these screws, you press the stripped wire into there, and then you tighten down the screw onto the wire. And I found that with this connection, I'm able to use 12 gauge speaker wire, which is more than large enough for the subwoofer. So now I can slide on this piece and this piece from the opposite end of the wire. And then as I tighten this up, like I mentioned before, that black piece on the inside crimps down on the wire and tightens. We just go until we can't tighten it anymore. And now we have our nice solid connection. So I now plug in the connector into the box and I'm determining exactly how much distance of wire I need in order to go to the connection terminals. Once I do determine the proper length, I cut the wire, I strip away some of the outside insulation, I strip away the insulation from the wires themselves, I'm adding wire ferrules onto these wires. I then put them into the terminals on the amplifier and tighten them down. To secure the wires on the box, I'll be using these plastic connections here. As you can imagine, these are easy enough to use. You just slide them over the wire, add a screw, and mount that onto the box. This gives us a nice clean look. We don't have to worry about our wires just dangling around. Now we need to make our quick connect power connection, and I'm planning on having the path for this going here and coming down, and then it can connect right here from the wire coming from the bottom of the vehicle. For the larger 8 gauge power and negative connections, I'm going to be using these style of connectors here. You can get these connectors in varying sizes. You could get them large enough for 0 gauge, and I'm also going to be using this type of connection here for the remote turn-on lead. Why am I using that instead of this style of connection? Well, more on that coming up. So one of these will obviously be connected to the wires and it's going to stay mounted on the box, and then the other one is connected to our wires that go to the distribution block in the vehicle. But something that's important about these is if you think about it, this connection in the vehicle is going to be a live connection. So we want to be able to leave on this protective cover. So in order to do that, I do need to make this so that it floats away from the surface slightly, because this has a little bit of thickness to it. That way, if it is floating above the surface, I'll be able to easily plug in. So to space these off the surface like I need them to be, I'm going to use this little plate that I made here out of 1/2 inch PVC. Next, I mount that PVC piece to the enclosure using 2 screws, and then I can mount one of the sides of our connector using 2 screws as well. Now I've cut myself a couple of lengths of wire here that I know are more than long enough to go from here to the connection, because I now need to crimp these into these special connectors that come with those connections. Now before we move on, I do want to say a quick thank you to our show sponsor, New Concepts. The wire that I'm using here is the Colossus Flex wire. This wire is a tinned, oxygen-free copper wire. By being tinned, it is resistant to corrosion, which makes it a great choice not only for car audio, but also marine applications. This wire is extremely flexible, very competitively priced. Next time you need wire for a build, definitely check out New Concepts at the link down in the video description. So to move forward, I need to crimp these special connections onto the end of the wire. So I of course strip away some of the insulation so I can slide this onto the wire like so, and now I can use this crimping die in this hydraulic crimping tool in order to crimp this on. You can actually get these for quite the bargain. Again, I have a link to all the tools and materials used in this video down in the video description as well. Once crimped on, it's going to look something like this. Once you have it crimped, you can slide it into the connector until you hear a snap. After mounting each of those wires in the terminal, I'm going to add wire ferrules to these wires before I put them into the amplifier. I'll add a piece of heat shrink to temporarily hold that ferrule in place, and then the ferrule is fully crimped on once we tighten down the set screw on the amplifier. This is just a good way to make sure we don't have any loose strands of wire sticking out of the terminals, and it's a much more clean way to do things. So check it out. Now when I go to make that power connection, I can remove that protective covering, and this really snaps and locks nicely into place. The next quick connect thing thing that I need to make a plan for is our remote wire. That's the wire that has a 12-volt lead on it, and it tells the amplifier to turn on. And what's nice about this amplifier is if we were using a high-level input, in other words, if we were tapping into the speaker level signal of our vehicle, we could change the turn-on mode to offset or signal to turn on this amp, and that would remove the need to even have a 12-volt lead connected here. But for my application, and this is pretty common, I'm using an aftermarket head unit, which is a low-level signal, so I do need to have a way to connect this remote signal wire, and to do that, I'm going to be using these. Now, if you guys are fans of the channel, you've probably seen me use these before. These connectors here have 2 connections in them, which is great for connecting a speaker. I can have the positive and negative lead. But in this case, obviously, I only need 1 wire connected. I don't need the 2 different wires. Why am I still going to use these instead of something like this? Well, unfortunately, this style of connection, I don't really trust it. I don't feel like it's robust enough that if I'm going to be connecting and disconnecting this multiple different times, that it's going to crimp on and hold on well. Whereas these, I know that these can be disconnected and connected a ton of times, and they are just fine. As far as I know, there is not a single conductor version of these, but maybe there is. Maybe you guys can help me out and point that out. But no big deal. I'll just be using only 1 of the connections instead of 2. To use these style of connectors, I first need to add some solder to the little connection tab and tin it. I then do the same thing and apply solder, tinning my wire. With solder on both surfaces, I can now heat up this little tab, and then I can add the wire in and hold it in place while the solder cools. Next, I add some heat shrink in order to protect and cover this connection. I can then add on this little cover piece that comes with these connectors and snap it in place. Now, for my purposes, in order to hold the connector in position, I am going to use some CA glue. This glue is extremely strong, and this will work really well. Next, I strip my wire connection and add another wire ferrule and add that into the amplifier, tightening everything down, and then I can again clamp the wires in position. The last quick connection point I want to make is for the RCA signal wires that are sending the signal into this amplifier. Now, technically, we could just use this point right here as our quick disconnect. We could simply plug in our RCA wires here, and when we did want to take everything out, we could just unplug here as well. But my thinking is I kind of want to avoid this connecting and disconnecting constantly at the amplifier, because what if these connections kind of get worn out over time? That constant movement and jiggling of those and forcing these on and off, that could lead to these connections wearing out. And obviously, to repair that, you have to repair the amplifier. What I'm thinking is a better idea is to use one of these. That way I'm doing my connecting and disconnecting here instead of on the amplifier. And the other advantage of having this in this location here is since all my power connections are close right here, I can also have that RCA connection close. So my 3 connections that I'm making to the vehicle, they're all in this one general area that I could have coming out of a panel. That way my wiring is much more tidy than having the power connections here and then the RCA connections all the way over here. This was the most simple connection to make. I just took one of these and I drilled a hole in the center. That way I could shoot a screw through it. I again added a little spacer made out of PVC here. So now the last thing to do is I just need to secure this RCA connection. So you guys know that we have to test this out. Just how quick can we make these connections? Well, I would say pretty darn quick, especially since there's only 3 connections to make. Just the RCA wires and then that remote lead and then the power connection. Everything goes together pretty quick. Once everything is wired in the vehicle, it could look something like this, where you just have all of your wire bundle coming out of one location in the vehicle, and then it's just really easy to make those different connections. Now, another note here, just because you can quickly disconnect your wiring by hand, you should have the box still bolted into the vehicle. You could use just a couple of bolts depending on the size of the enclosure. Obviously, you need to do your research there, but only having to undo a couple of bolts and then simply disconnecting our wiring connections here is simple enough when we need to remove the subwoofer. All right, my friends, so we've got the box quick connected here inside of the vehicle. It's all mounted, all installed, all ready to go. You know that we have to do a test listen, because in the last few videos, you know I built this custom subwoofer enclosure. I did an overview video on the JL Audio JD250/1. So keep in mind, this is only 250 watts RMS. We're going to be listening to some royalty-free music. Let's do it. Here we go. definitely a good amount of bass, especially again considering only 250 watts RMS, the subwoofer and amp combo under $500. I'm happy, I like it. Definitely a very modest entry-level bass upgrade. Here on this channel, I do car audio build logs, lessons, and product overview videos, so if you're new here, I would love to have you as a subscriber. Thank you to show sponsor New Concepts. Learn more about their wire and wire accessories at the link down in the video description. Also, a special thanks to Mike, Ron, Ali, Jerry, Marcos, William, and the rest of the Patreon membership team. A big thanks to all those guys for making these videos possible. And as always, thank you for watching.